Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Are we cuddled by our fires with a cup of rot chocolate, ready to endure the snow fury to come? Well, then throw a log on the fire and make sure nothing evil comes sliding down the chimney. It's time for tonight's tale of Christmas carnage, one that Doughboy420 likes to call The Legend of Fleshy the Snowman. In the late 13th century, there began a legend of the whipping man, Pierre Fouettard. He began his days as a professional butcher. He was an angry man and took his aggressions out on animals in order to feed the people of his village and himself. However, one December, his meat supply had drawn very low, and it being a particularly harsh winter, he was also low on money. He didn't know where to turn. He didn't know what to do. He was growing more and more hungry by the day, until finally it was all too much for him. He decided he would go rob a group of children from well-off families. 3 boys would travel by his home and the butcher shop every day. So he figured this would be the best chance for him to get some money. He would hit the boys with a walking stick and take their money before they were able to get back up. He sat behind a bush near his home and waited for the 3 boys to pass in the evening. He listened for their familiar joking and laughing, and then watched as they walked by him. This is where he sprang into action, jumping out behind them and smacking one of the boys in the back of the head with his walking stick. The kid dropped like a sack of potatoes, and his friends slowly turned to see the boy, now lying in a pool on the ground, twitching with his eyes rolled back in his head. But before either of them could cry for help, the butcher did much the same to them, slamming the walking stick into their midsection, knocking the children to the ground, where he continued to beat them until they stopped moving. He had only intended to knock them down and take their money, but once he started, he couldn't stop, and now 3 boys lay dead at his feet. He had just murdered them, and now he didn't know what to do next, but he figured that he probably shouldn't let good meat go to waste. So he cooked the boys, boiling the meat from their bones in his big pot. The legend goes that from there, good old Saint Nick punished Pierre Fouettard and forced him to travel by his side every December, where it would be his job to deliver the coal to the naughty children, and for those that were particularly bad, he would dispense violent beatings to force them into obedience. This is where the legend ends for most that tell it. But the true story is that he captured, ate, and sold the meat of far more than 3 children. In fact, he lived far longer than any normal man. He killed for centuries before Kris Kringle bound him to servitude for his misdeeds, and in all that time, he continued to hunt children every December, cooking them in a pot over the fire and, over time, eventually over an iron stove with a fire raging within. And it is with this iron stove that our wintry tale begins. Decades after Santa Claus came and took the monster of the home away, the house became completely unlivable. The wood began to rot, and the plants started to creep, until finally the roof collapsed and the building had caved in upon itself. Many more years passed, and the wood decayed to dirt, becoming a home for insect life. The house rotted away to nothing, until only the rusted, old stove remained. Every year, the rain and snow would slowly peel away the layers of metal bit by bit, turning the iron stove to a rusty red, until one cold winter day, a child came upon a mound of snow and found it had a hollow opening inside. After further inspection, he found that the hill of snow was actually piled atop an old iron stove. The boy came up with a funny idea. He decided to build a snowman around this stove, using the iron door of the stove as his belly. He took a long time perfecting his snowman, even going back home to get him an old, ragged top hat, some chunks of coal for eyes and to line his mouth, and a big carrot nose. The boy put the finishing touches on the stove-bellied snowman and stood back to marvel at his work. But it was no sooner that he did that something strange began to occur. The coal eyes sank back into hollow, darkened sockets. The mouth opened as the head tilted back. The pieces of coal that lined it were now long, sharp teeth, and something weird began to happen with the snow of his body. The boy watched in horror as the snow melted away to the blood and warm flesh beneath. Steaks, sausages, ground beef, and meat on bone. The butchered and prepared flesh of countless children that were cooked upon the iron stove within his hungry, burning belly. The fires raged up through him to burst out through his hollow sockets.
"Well, happy birthday to me!"
The flesh-covered snowman spoke. The small boy just stood there in wide-eyed terror.
"Why, hello there, little boy,"
the fleshy snowman said in a tone that was equal parts bright and jolly, and dark and frightening.
"Have you been good this year?"
the snowman asked. The boy simply nodded, eyes wide and unblinking, his mouth agape and the rest of his body frozen in place as he stared at the monstrosity before him, unable to move from where he stood.
"That's good to hear, my boy. Good to hear. But
the flesh-covered snowman began.
"I've been here for what feels like forever, and forever is a long time. And in that time, I've watched this little village grow into a town, watching from a distance. I've watched the people grow cold toward each other. I'm going to make everyone appreciate this holiday season just a little bit more,"
he finished with a sinister grin.
"Now, you run along and tell them that."
He paused for a moment.
"I don't have a name,"
the snowman said, with a look of confusion upon his writhing, flesh-covered face.
You're Fleshy's snowman,"
the little boy finally managed to speak, barely spitting out the words in his shock.
Fleshy. I like that. Fleshy the snowman,"
Fleshy said with a smile.
"Thanks, kid. Now you run along and tell them old Fleshy is on his way. Not that it'll do them any good,"
he said with a smile, before shooing the child along. The boy stood there for a few seconds later, as he was realizing that he was free to go, and then he took off faster than he had ever run before, booking it into town, screaming the entire way. Fleshy chuckled at the thought of the boy screaming bloody murder and the look on the people's faces when they hear him ranting about a fleshy snowman. And then He went into full-on hysterics as he thought of the look on their faces when he got a hold of them and they discovered that the kid wasn't lying. The first person to see Fleshy was Mr. Burnside, the postman. He would oftentimes steal people's mail, stuffing envelopes into his pockets. So, fitting to his crime, Fleshy the Snowman stuffed the mail into the mailboxes that he stole from, breaking off pieces of his body and tying a colorful ribbon on them to leave as gifts for others. The next person he got a hold of with his stick arms was old Mrs. Vandergast. She was rich and snobby and wouldn't spare a penny for a person in need. The old lady got her purse emptied into her mouth and pushed down her throat, coins and bills causing her throat to bulge in an odd, misshapen way as she turned blue, choking to death on her own money. Quickly, people took notice of the chaos and everyone ran screaming as the flesh-covered snowman rampaged through their town. Mr. Pendle exited his place of business to see what all the commotion was about, where he was hastily sprayed with a geyser of blood as two-faced Heather T was split in half at his doorstep. Mr. Pendle was guilty of cutting back on his employees' pay around the holidays, making them unable to feed their families, much less buy them any gifts for Christmas.
Sir, you have been very naughty for a long time, and it has gone unpunished for far too long.
Fleshy spoke as he leaned down and looked Mr. Pendle in the eye. "Please, don't hurt me," the man begged.
Your greed in life will match your punishment in death. Your chain is even longer than most.
Fleshy spoke as he leaned back away from the man, allowing room for an iron door in front of the stove to swing open. The flames rolled up out of the opening in his stomach, and from there, dozens of burning hot chains shot out of Fleshy's belly and wrapped themselves around the screaming Mr. Pendle, squeezing him tight like the constriction of a snake, and pulling the struggling man toward the opening before him, forcing his body through the small door, folding him in upon himself to suck his body through the small passage, his bones crunching and breaking to squeeze through to be burned up inside. The people of the neighborhood continued to flee in terror, and there were several guilty souls that were given punishments to match their sins. Miss Helgen was trying to hide in one of the shops, but Fleshy reached right in, smashing through the display window to grab the woman hiding inside. She was a terrible humbug of a woman that hated Christmas and took down, destroyed, or complained of Christmas displays. This woman would be made into Christmas decorations for the pine tree outside the store. Her intestines were like one long strand of garland wrapped around the tree. Strips of her flesh were peeled away and used as tinsel. Her teeth, eyes, fingers, and toes with painted nails were all used as ornaments hung around the tree, and her mangled body was left beneath the pine like a bloody Christmas gift. Somehow, Fleshy was able to do all of this in just a few minutes, his maniacal magic working its way to decorate the tree with gore. Fleshy the Snowman decorated the streets with red, the color of Christmas, and poor little Timothy was terrified. He believed the beast would eat him, much like he did his obese father, but instead, the Snowman turned his attention to Elton and Elroy, the twin brothers that terrorized young Timmy, calling him Timmy the Twig because he was so thin and small. Fleshy grabbed a hold of the boys with his twig arms and looked at them both, holding them in front of his sinister smile.
So, you like to make fun of other children. You like to get your kicks by giving them a roast. Well, how about I give you a roast?
Fleshy said with a chuckle before dangling them from their feet and swinging open the door to his stove once more. From here, he allowed the flames to roar outward, burning the boys' faces first in the hellfire of his belly. He continued to cut through the neighborhood, and the horrible people were helpless against his horrors. He cleaned house of anyone that was an evildoer in his eyes, and he had seen enough to know who was naughty and who was nice. The nice ones would be spared and allowed to walk away with a smile, while the naughty ones were made into festive holiday decorations, adding a little of himself to the season by decorating the town to look like him. A small militia showed up. Dozens of townsfolk with torches, guns, and gardening tools arrived in an attempt to eradicate the evil beast that wrought havoc on their little town. They shot him with bullets, stuck him with pitchforks, ripping pieces of flesh from his body. Flesh that would quickly turn to maggots, earthworms, and insects when it left his core, causing some to flee in sheer disgust. Fleshy just laughed at them, the stove in his belly shaking and creaking with his jolly laughter.
Mr. Higgins, you went hunting with a friend, and only you came back. No one else knew, but I did. I saw it from my spot on the hill,
Fleshy said before inhaling a deep breath.
You killed John? You son of
A woman in the crowd began to yell, but she was interrupted by a loud boom as a burst of bullets shot out of Fleshy's iron belly. The lead tore through Mr. Higgins like he was nothing, leaving the shape of a snowman cut through his body like a cookie cutter. Several people ran away at that instant, but several more stayed to fight Fleshy, even though they didn't stand a chance. Fleshy smashed his arm through 3 people at once, skewering them like a kebab and ripping out their corrupted hearts, adding the organs to his own, causing his heart to grow 3 sizes, and perhaps it was this that allowed what happened next to happen at all. The little boy who Fleshy had met, the one who had inspired his name, returned, and slowly and meekly walked toward the abominable Fleshy Snowman.
Please, Mr. Fleshy Snowman.
The terrified boy stuttered, standing between he and his next victim.
Don't hurt my daddy, please. I know he isn't always the best, but he's nice too. He gave me my favorite book for Christmas last year. It made me feel better when I needed it. I think you should have it. Maybe it will help you.
The small boy spoke, putting his head down and holding out a hard-cover red book with gold lettering reading Christmas Tales in his hands. Fleshy stopped where he stood, the menacing expression on his face changing to one of a kind and odd confusion. He didn't quite understand why this little kid would do such a thing, but nonetheless, he took the book and flipped through its pages, looking at the words and pictures within for a moment, before closing the book again. Fleshy's expression changed once more to a kind of warm smile.
You've shown such compassion, kid. You've set an example to live by. Keep that up, and make sure everyone else around here does much the same. Otherwise, I'll be back again someday.
The flesh-covered snowman said, his voice more calm now. The bits and pieces of meat then began to detach themselves with strands of bloody tissue between them, slowly separating to swirl around his mass. The chunks of steak, sausages, bones, and blood began to swirl about, causing a vortex around Fleshy's form. More and more chunks of meat began to break away. The stove in his stomach started to slowly deteriorate and vanish, and with each piece of meat that detached from the core of his body, he became smaller and smaller, until finally there was nothing left.
Remember what I said.
were the last words he spoke before the chunks of flesh were scattered to the winds, vanishing into nothingness. The remaining townsfolk managed to move on after the unnatural disaster of his arrival. It took them some time to clear up the mess that was left, and even longer to clear up their nightmares. Some still linger. But the desired effect did transpire. The people of the town did change their ways. They weren't perfect, but they were all much nicer to everyone. Perhaps they genuinely cared now, or perhaps it was the shared trauma. Either way, they changed after that. Everything changed after that. And from then on, they passed down the story of how a monstrous snowman made of flesh terrorized their town, until a little boy, brave and true, offered up a Christmas sacrifice. Of course, over time, the meaning of what was given was almost entirely lost, and history was doomed to repeat itself. Seems old Fleshy promised to return someday, and return he did, like a malady of merry mayhem. So it would appear that Santa isn't the only thing watching you this year. But if you want to have some more terrorific Christmas fun, slide back in again next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday. Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.